Well, thanks very much, Ken, for that very generous introduction. Also, Helen, thanks very much for your contribution. That was terrific. And might I say, Susan, that welcome to country, I think that's about the best I've ever heard. So well done. Alana. I've just noticed Alana, one of my colleagues from Gold Murray Water, I don't know if everyone knows, but she was recently awarded an AO, Australian Award. So it's why you're all here, serving community, and that was a recognition of serving this community. So congratulations, Alana. I think it deserves a round of applause. I often wonder why an ex-politician gets hauled up to do these sorts of jobs. It reminded me of a story I heard about a chap, this is some decades ago. He lived in central Borneo and he was a little depressed, and his wife could see that he needed a bit of bunking up. So she decided to go down to the local butcher and thought she'd buy him something special that she could cook up and try and lift his spirits a little bit. The family, of course, were cannibals. And anyway, the butcher brought out a tray and he said, "What's in these?" And he said, "Oh, these are sailor's brains." And he said, "Look, they're probably a little bit too salty for my husband's taste. What else have you got?" And pulled out another tray. Well, the first tray, he said, was 10 cents a kilogram. And pulled out the next tray, and the next tray said, "These are missionaries' brains." And she said, "How much are they?" And he said, 20 cents a kilogram. And she said, "Look, when we're normally having brains, it's normally missionaries' brains, so what else have you got?" And finally, he was a bit reticent, and there was one other tray sitting there, and she said, "What about those?" And he finally brought them out, and he said, "Look, these are politicians' brains." And he said, "Well, how much are they?" And the butcher said, "Well, they're $20 a kilogram." And she said, $10, for the 10 cents for the sailors and 20 cents for the missionaries and $20 for those. He said, "Madam," he said, "what you don't understand is how many politicians it takes to get a kilogram of brains." So, look, I think this is a great idea, Susan, getting this group together. And I'm going to say something at the finish. And I think, you talked about outcomes and what we might do out of this. I've got a thought, and I'll leave you with that at the finish. But the fires, as we all recognise in Australia, are getting more fierce and more frightening. I go back to looking at some of the bushfire areas about a day after the Black Saturday in 2009. And I can remember going up to an area up in the King Lake area, and we saw a house burnt out, we saw some cars burnt out, and there was a bit of a slope away from the house. And then there was this solidified stream of metal that ran about, probably 4 or 5 metres. And I thought, what the hell is that? It's a bit strange. And I questioned a few people, and they said, that's the engine block in the car. Now, what temperature does, Ken might know, if there's a few fireys here, I mean, what temperatures does it take to melt an engine block? It's used to running under heat. It's got to be resistant to heat. If you set 1,000 degrees, it's probably underestimating it. And then people talked about the experience of the fire coming through. And, we had at that stage, we had the culture of stay and defend. Now it's, get the hell out of there. But that was what we thought we needed to do. We needed to stay and defend the property. If you weren't there, the house would get burnt down, the fire would sort of whip through, and then you'd come out and put out the spot fires that started, and you'd save your house. But they said when the fire, for people who did stay and survived, they said it was like a jumbo jet landing on your front lawn. The noise was just absolutely terrifying. And I don't think anyone who hasn't been through it would really understand that sort of terror. But we're learning all the time, we're responding. I think the way in which the apps on your phone and the messaging and what's happening with the ABC and the warnings that come out now, we're all better prepared. We've got more firebombers than what we ever had. But still, how do you control nature? And I think we need to understand that obviously these are things we have to live with. One of the outcomes out of Black Saturday was a change in the specifications for rebuilding. Now that's great, and it makes the homes that are rebuilt more sustainable for future fires, but there's also a significant cost. So people had insured a house that they thought, the insurance will cover the rebuilding. It certainly didn't cover the cost of the new rebuilding requirements that they added significantly to it. I think probably I should just go through very briefly where we're at now with our bushfire appeal. We've raised, as of today, just a tick over $30 million. Last time, the total raised by the bushfire appeal was $385 million, and we put about half of that out as emergency relief, and then there was mid-term relief and longer-term relief, where we actually put money into assisting communities on rebuilding. And we earned a bit of interest on that, so we finished up paying out about $17 million more than we actually got donated, in total $402 million. But this time, obviously, it's not just Victoria. It was Victoria on its own last time. It's a national fire. It's been in Western Australia, South Australia, Queensland, the ACT, New South Wales, and of course Victoria. Anne Leadbeater and I are both also on the Red Cross Appeal Fund, one of 4 independent people who are assisting them in the distribution of funds. They're running a national campaign, and I think as of last week they've attracted about $200 million, and they've committed about 50% of that to go out in terms of emergency relief. The Salvation Army are also raising money. St Vincent de Paul are raising money, and then there are other individual charities, like Celeste Barber, who raised over $50 million. One of the interesting things that's come out, and it's probably been a bit of a shock to probably Celeste herself, that she raised money and she put it into Rural Fire Services New South Wales, but it can only be used to buy fire trucks and build fire stations. It can't be used to assist people, and they're trying to see if they can reconfigure that. But it's very difficult, working through charities legislation. One of the issues we had back after Black Saturday was we said, okay, well, we want to assist with farm fencing. And we had to run all these suggestions through the ATO. And the ATO said, well, look, farm fencing is a business. It's not a charity. And it doesn't come under the Charities Act. We found a way around it this time because we're giving money, and we did that the previous time too. We're giving money directly to Blaze Aid, and Blaze Aid have what's called an Item 1 category for farm fencing. So they've been terrific to deal with. We offered them $2 million. They said they only wanted $1 million. I've said keep the other $1 million aside for when they do spend that amount of money. But they're getting money from a range of charities and doing some fantastic work. The fund is operating under the auspices of the Bendigo Bank's community fund, and they have an independent trustee, Sandhurst Trustees, that is also a second-tier verification. But we've committed for initial funding at $4.5 million between the North East and Gippsland. More's gone to Gippsland because of the number of homes being lost. And the Gippsland Relief Fund, Emergency Relief Fund, have distributed that money, making allocations of between about $1,000 and $4,500 for people who lost their primary residence. And we've handed money over to the Salvation Army a couple of weeks ago and asked them to do the same in the northeast of Victoria. We've also decided to make a payment of $25,000 to everyone who's lost their primary residence, and that includes people who are renting. If that was their primary residence, they'll also get $25,000. And we're trying to get some coordination with other charities. The Red Cross have already committed $20,000 per household for people who've lost their home. So that's $45,000 if you lost your primary residence between us and the Red Cross. And the Gippsland Relief Fund have topped up funds they had on hand to close to $10,000. So there'll be about $55,000 go to people in Gippsland. We were amazed, as we were the previous over Black Saturday, the response to Australian fires is a worldwide thing. You see it on CNN and Fox International. All those broadcasters around the world, the BBC, are reporting what's happening in Australia and watching with a lot of interest. And one of the really, I thought, lovely responses was the township of Villers-Brettoneux, who fly the Australian flag, are very grateful for what the Aussies did during the First World War. They helped rebuild a school in the King Lake area. And I thought, what a nice link, and 100 years since that happened. I think, 1 minute, okay. The rebuilding, what we would like to do is to work with community projects. We're giving some money in conjunction with the Jewish community for the Man for Snowy River event. They've had the shed that housed all their equipment, $200,000 worth of equipment has been burnt, and we're doing something there. Ken alluded to the fact that people go through a lot of ongoing stress after a fire. I think after all that initial help sort of fades away and you're left on your own, I think that's when the mental health issues really start to happen. And people living in a caravan for however long until they get to rebuild a house is not an easy thing. Someone said to me that their 3 children, their wife wanted him to buy a caravan for the family. And he said, well, look, let's just try living in the kitchen for a week with the 5 of us and see how we all get on. If you can imagine doing that for 6 months, probably a bit of a challenge. Look, the final note I wanted to finish on, the Gippsland Emergency Relief Foundation is something that was set up in Gippsland about 40 years ago. Mitchell has been the chairman of that, and I first met John when I joined that council almost 50 years ago. He was a very young Shire secretary, and they have got all 6 councils in Gippsland as part of it. They've got a lot of major businesses at AMP and a whole lot of others that are regular contributors to it. They do a whole range of things raising money, and it's not just for fires, for every disaster. So we had the floods obviously in Benalla back in '93 in the northeast of Victoria. We have storms, we have fires, we have a lot of the same things that Gippsland has. And it would have been really terrific if we had a similar organisation here that we could have gone to as a fund to deal with that handing out of the money. I think perhaps you could put this on the agenda for today. If this community would like to actually form that foundation, the first thing is get all your councils on board as part of it. And I think many of them would be receptive. And we also funded a legacy foundation up in the northeast out of the Bushfire Fund in 2009. And that's sort of tapering off, but a lot of those people have already contacted us and said, look, we'd like to do something to carry on. That could also be a base working with the local councils. So if I could leave that thought and thank everyone for their attendance today, and I think it's going to be a very productive outcome that hopefully can leave some good legacies for the future. Thank you.